afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. Thank you very much, Amy, for this opportunity to stand on stage, especially after the likes of David Crane and sort of standard people that we've heard talking up to this point. And I'm going to tell you a story today, so it's a little bit more relaxed politics, but it's a story that does touch on that. And it ended 6 months ago, where all the lines meet at the bottom of the world, the South Pole. And I spent 2 months skiing there, and made the first ever renewably powered expedition to the South Pole, and also made it the first net positive expedition from an emission standpoint. So, how did I get here? It's a bit of a long story, but it started with this madman, my father, Robert Swan, and in the 80s he became the first person stupid enough, his words not mine, to walk to the North and South Pole, really hardy expeditions, using a sun, a sextant, a watch on the South Pole expeditions, no radio, no GPS. If they had screwed up their navigation even by 0.5 of a degree, they would have walked around in circles, starved to death, and had the same consequences as the real explorers, Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen, those people who pioneered the way back at the turn of the century in 1905, around then. And Dad walked in their footsteps, 1,700 miles, and became the first person to walk to the North and South Pole, a title that will never be taken away from him. And this was him reaching the North Pole, flying a flag I still think is relevant today. And after coming back from the South Pole, he got charged by Jacques Cousteau, one of his key patrons, to really hold the responsibility for the future of Antarctica in my father's hands, because what he experienced down there at the South Pole, he walked under the hole in the ozone layer the year it was discovered. That's super convenient. His face blistered off, his eyes changed color. And when he walked to the North Pole, he experienced ice melt 4 months before it ever had an issue that happens yearly now. But he was at the beginning stages of really seeing that and walking through it. And Jacques Cousteau, key patron, gave him a 50-year mission, not something you get given every day, especially when you've just lost 38 kilos in 90 days walking. So not every day you get a 50-year mission, but he did, and he's been a part of effective education, renewable energy, taking people to Antarctica, voyage around the oceans, 250,000 nautical miles, a voyage for renewable cleaner energy, rather. I was a part of several parts of that voyage, but that's Dad's legacy, and coming into that, I've been working with him for the last 6 years, but I think what really leads me to standing on stage now was the meeting at NASA Ames Station. I think it was about 3-4 years ago, and we walked in there, Dad and I, and they really just spelt it out. Edward Balaban, a man working on AI now for the rovers to make sure they don't run out of battery and follow the sun. Him and his team really just explained the reality of what Antarctica is capable of, and the fact that most of the things that are happening with climate change comes back to this mighty place, twice the size of America. In winter, 90% of the world's ice, 70% of the world's fresh water. This place has the power to shape our future, rise our oceans, change the salinity. I mean, this is the symbol of what is happening to our climate. And coming out of that conversation, I really felt CO2 was the focus, and to be honest, the elephant in the room for a lot of mainstream people surrounding the issue of climate change. And that's what 1 ton of CO2 looks like, and that's a daily's worth dose of CO2, around 360 million tons per day over New York City. So it's a lot of CO2, and for me it was something a little bit intangible. CO2, it's a gas, but what I'm trying to do moving forward is make it a little bit more tangible. And this is actually what concentrated CO2 looks like when it's sequestered into the ground. It's tangible. I like tangible. It's got a tiny bit of calcium oxide in it, but this is real. This is something that can bring tangibility to something that is over my head, to be honest, and over a lot of people's head. And it's a global issue. We're all a part of creating CO2, whether it be dropping our kids at a football game, or hopping on a plane, or managing supply chain. It doesn't matter. We are all part of this issue. And as you can see, different degrees, different countries, but this is a global issue. And it's affecting people locally. I was in London, England, a couple of weeks ago with my grandma. England still had hope of bringing it home. They didn't. But my grandma's sitting in a little conservatory, she's 103 this year, and she was saying, why is everyone focused on Brexit and football, and we're experiencing the hottest summer since the 70s, and I'm actually having trouble getting out of bed. I'm so hot, and that's coming from my grandma. So it's a global issue, but it's affecting us all locally, whether it be driving from California 2 days ago and having to keep the windows closed. Global, but local impact. And so Dad and I, working the last 6 years, wanted to do something a little bit more relevant, and I wanted to have a story that would capture people's attention and create my own relevancy within my age group. And so working father and son together, we wanted to make the first renewably powered expedition to the South Pole. It wasn't easy by any means pulling it together, 2 years worth of logistics, 20 sponsors, but we made it happen. And end of last year, we found ourselves at the bottom of Patagonia, and we had our NASA-designed solar ice melting system, advanced biofuel supplied by Shell. Yes, very controversial. I will go over the reasons that I think it's important to work with the likes of Shell and big industry. Vacuum flasks, as you can see on the left there, and Goal Zero portable solar technology, which David Crane, who you just heard from the last two panels, linked us to Goal Zero, which was a partner sponsor to NRG. So that was our energy system, and likes of Martin Barnett, crazy Welshman, and Carl O'Donoghue, we would embark on this 1,000-kilometer journey at the end of last year with my dad in tow. And it's one thing to talk about doing something and then you get dropped in 360 degrees ice with 16,000 feet of solid ice beneath your feet in some sections of the continent, and you realize that you're in for a bit of a bumpy ride the next 2 months. And so, sure enough, from the get-go, we realized if you're walking in dodgy light conditions, you're not paying attention, falling into a hole that goes down 1,000 plus feet, probably not the best idea. And from the last two weeks, even a week in, it was a reality that my dad, at the ripe old age of 62, was having a bit of a hard time, to say the least. Fatigue, not having enough time to recover. We were averaging about 8 nautical miles a day. We had to do about 14 nautical miles a day to make sure we had enough food to get there in time. And I think this moment, sharing a tent with him, as you can see, his face is a bit messed up. And after taking this photo, he asked me to put some zinc oxide on his face, and actually swashed off a good size bit of his cheek with my finger from frostbite. So that was just a huge reminder of where we're at and the consequences of not paying attention to wind or anything. And the ice circle, as my father called it, slowly sucked him back, because we had to keep our pace, Carl, myself, and Martin, to make sure we kept the pace, got the nautical miles we needed. But as a result, we would be going forward in this line, this sort of caterpillars walking aimlessly through a void. But behind, there was a caterpillar that was left behind, and that was my dad, and he would be slowly getting sucked into this ice circle and reliving the fact that if he was in that position in the 80s, he would have been left for dead. His team would have left him, and he would have died. And so reliving that trauma of walking to the South Pole, I mean, what he achieved back in the 80s was traumatic. I mean, it's a serious deal to put yourself in that situation. And hearing voices of people who had died in Antarctica that he knew, I mean, things got pretty intense. Not just the fact we were intense, but like actually just mentally completely blew him out of his socks, to be honest. And he made the decision as a team, we made the decision as a team, that he would have to be pulled out just before halfway point. And it was a hard moment seeing my father looking back like that, because we'd all be coming up normally side by side, and he just stopped and was looking behind when we had nine hours of marching every day, 1 hour, 15-minute march, 10-hour break in that cycle for just under 60 days. And it was poignant seeing him looking behind like that. It was, gives me goosebumps. And you can see he definitely went through the ringer. He pushed himself to the limits, and that's a man not super happy about having to leave his son to complete another 600 kilometers through going up into altitude towards the South Pole. And saying goodbye to him was very quiet. I love quiet, I love meditating, I love scuba diving, I love being on the top of a mountain. I love silence, and as you can imagine, a place that doesn't even have bacteria is pretty quiet. But when that plane disappeared, it was like a ringing silence. Like, my father has a big energy, as you can imagine, to be the first person stupid enough to walk to the North and South Pole. But like, once that disappeared, it was like ringingly quiet. And all of the sponsors, everything that we had done for 3 years, the responsibilities, my father's legacy, my legacy, all rested on my shoulders to, per se. If I had failed on this expedition, all of it would effectively been not pointless, but not what we planned. And I just want to touch on the point. I think some people here probably get a little wiggly in their chest seeing Shell up there, and I copped a lot of heat working with Shell, but trolls on the internet or whoever it may be, how can you come to me and say, oh, you're working with the enemy? How can you consider yourself an environmentalist? And I'm like, have you ever hopped on a plane? Do you have an iPhone? Do you wear jeans? Have you ever, been to a gas station? And that hypocrisy is stifling for me. It's suffocating. Why can't people see that we are a part of the problem? And obviously big business, big oil, big corporations are also a part of the problem, but they're a part of the solution as well. Like, look at, Shell alone has 500,000 service employees within all their retail stations. That's 500 ambassadors, 500,000 ambassadors to make impact, make ambitions come alive. And I'm proud to work with Shell. I wasn't at the beginning by any means, but I am proud to work with Shell now because they are making that effort to be a part, not effort, they're creating ambitions that are far past other big oil companies, and it's been a long journey, but I'm frustrated by them just as much as I'm sure many of you are, but I think it's important to channel that frustration into being proactive instead of just whining about it. So yeah, all of that responsibility on my shoulders, and it wasn't always happy faces out there, having a bandana glued to your mask as you're trying to march up a hill and you're kind of suffocating. It's not ideal. And the solar panels, the ice melters, even the biofuel, everything went through the ringer. And that was Christmas Day, doing as good as we could do. And slowly but surely, I started to get frostbite on my feet. About day 40, my feet just didn't start waking up. And super fun having to walk another 9 hours as they slowly started getting worse, and I started reliving that intensity of seeing faces in shadows and hearing sort of mumblings behind you, and you look behind and there's just ice. And I was talking to my girlfriend, Brittany, who's here with me, that it almost made me shut down as a survival thing out there. Like, I had to shut down all of the saturation that followed me out there, all of the Instagram posts and the Facebook, and is Donald Trump going to blow up North Korea, and all of this stuff that I entered into this experience with. It just, that's all I had, because I didn't bring my phone, I didn't have internet for 2 months, and just pushing that all down, as the gentleman we heard doing 100,000 nautical miles around on a boat, being in those sort of settings, having to surrender to nothingness, it taught me a lot about myself and about just the mind, really. It was I got to the point of seeing thoughts come in and then either choosing to interact with them or they would just disappear, and then you just go back to silence and weirdness. And it got cold for sure. This was minus 50 on this day, pretty nippy. And the image I'm about to show you isn't just to prove a point that it was hard, but it's to show that these things aren't a joke. My feet started falling apart. I had frostbite on my feet, my hands, my face. Like, doing extreme things in the ocean or on top of a mountain or in Antarctica. We have to respect these places and know the consequences. And not being able to feel my feet and having to, cut off bits of black with Swiss Army knives made me think of my garden in California and sunflowers and generally having my feet in some sand. And but the reality was, another 9 hours the next day and two more weeks to get to the South Pole. And the parhelions out there, if anyone's seen a parhelion, they were very special to me. I've seen the northern lights and phosphorescence in the ocean, and between those two things and these sun formations out there, they're just something that truly just like, where am I? Like, they're literally a full halo around the sun, a half-arc rainbow at the top, and then these two orbs that come out the side go the whole way around the horizon, create another two light orbs, and you're just like, what, where am I, what's going on exactly? And instead of seeing my father behind, I saw this figure walking towards me, and 60 nautical miles out, a small team who we had already organized pre to the expedition of 5 people joined us for the last 60 nautical miles. But seeing my father, who obviously left the team to come and welcome myself, Carl, and Martin, was a very surreal full circle moment. And for him, I think it was the first time he actually realized what he had done walking to the North and South Pole. And just a hugely impactful moment for me, and that was the kind of end of the expedition per se, because we could slow down and I could eat more. But it was, I'll never forget that hug. He didn't let go for a quick second, that's for sure. And standing at the South Pole was a surreal moment after 3 years worth of logistics, thinking about these madmen who definitely weren't too happy to see that Shackleton's flag, the Norwegian flag, was there instead of theirs. That's Scott arriving at the pole a month after Shackleton had done it. Or my father, who walked in Scott's shoes on the footsteps of Scott, and then suddenly I'm standing there, and it's like, okay, I just walked 2 months and I'm standing at a pole. It's like complete anticlimax, to be honest. it's like what was the point in that? And looking at that ball, the reflection for me was a very poignant moment. It was you don't see yourself for 2 months with a mirror, and then you suddenly look at yourself and you've got frostbite and a beard and your eyes are a bit different. And it was a very surreal moment flying back from there, not only taking 4 hours to do what you did in 2 months just to reinforce the pointlessness of it, but to just think about what's ahead. And thankfully I did have a mission going ahead, but I can imagine whether it be returning from open ocean or returning from a serious expedition or whatever it may be, or maybe transitioning, your business path or whatever it may be, there's sometimes a void. And I really felt the potential for that void sitting on that plane. And not having a shower for the first time in 2 months, I really felt like it wasn't a good experience, by the way. Like layers of skin falling off and just like wasn't sort of, no. It wasn't enjoyable, but it really shed something. I felt a shedding and a huge responsibility to do more when I got home. And I know that we made it the first net positive expedition. We cleaned up 350 tons associated with the expedition over 2 years worth of logistics, automotive transport, plane transport, home electricity bills, added 25% to that number, 350, cleaned all of that up through tree planting, direct air capture, various other things, which I'm going to go through in a little bit. But it wasn't enough, and after having that shower, hopping on the plane and returning back to Shell headquarters in London, which is not ideal after being in pristine Antarctica and Patagonia, to be thrown into that debauchery is not ideal, to say the least. But it reminded me of the problem and the capacity, as this whole title of this fantastic forum, creating opportunity out of risk. I really felt that, but it was stifling coming back, and screens for me were one of the hardest things. Sitting on the London tube with frostbite and sort of generally feeling like an alien, and you look around and every single person on the tube carriage is either on a box or they've got something in their ears, and they're like, whoosh. And I'm just looking around, I'm like, is this really society? What have I just come back to? Like, this is distraction. It's obviously a necessity to get business done, to communicate, to express creativity, but we're getting used by technology. And after being disconnected for 2 months, coming back to that, it was apparent that we are getting used by technology, and we really need to shift towards using it instead of it being used by it. And that sounds cliched, but I felt that wholeheartedly coming back. And went to the World Economic Forum only 4 days after returning, and really reinforced that institutional and bureaucratic roadblocks that we face to make all of this happen. I just felt that people were talking about these cycles of what's to do and what needs to be done, but no one's actually doing it. I mean, I've been to the United Nations in New York, I've been to Davos, I've been to, this standard of forum, and it just really reinforced the bottleneck that we're up against. And, everyone's talking about Big Don flying around in his airplane, but no one, hardly anyone was talking about climate change there. And I did my effort, I did podcasts and spoke, but I was feeling really frustrated and, to be honest, pretty disenchanted and disempowered. But thankfully, coming back to that mission that made me feel better on the plane returning back from my pointless expedition, was the Climate Force Challenge, which is a 7-year campaign to clean up 360 million tons of CO2 before the year 2025. How does one do that? You integrate small solutions, which is more of a grassroots effort. You restore through big solutions, which I'm going to go through all of these, and you connect people through adventure and through experience. And those three things combined, and the goal of cleaning up 360 million tons really is my everything. What gets me out of bed, what gets me on airplanes, it drives me forward because it's tangible and it holds true to metrics and target. And I can't remember if it was David, whoever, one of the panelists was mentioning that I just don't feel like there's enough targets, enough things that people can channel all the things that we're talking to and actually feel like their impact has gone towards a target, gone towards a metric, and it isn't greenwash bullshit. It's real, science-bound reality. And I think the metric is something that makes it unique, and obviously using technology as a way to do that. To give one example, I'd love to see a mum who wants to make their family net positive, let's say 100 tons. The average American, just FYI, uses 20 tons per year. Average sub-Saharan African uses 1.5. Average Indian uses 4.6. Average Saudi uses 28. So let's say a stay-at-home family mum wants to offset their family for 100 tons. I want it for them to be just as much ease for them to do that as a business who wants to offset 100,000, 200,000 tons. It has to be just as much access and accessibility for solutions that both reduce and directly restore from both of those spectrums, from the grassroots of the family mum or the big hedge fund CSR ESG manager. It needs to be just as much accessibility from top to bottom, and I didn't see that, and that's what I'm trying to create through this. So what are some examples of integrating small solutions? I'm going to have five different categories, 5 solutions for each, and I could explain all of them, but I don't have enough time. But some examples of small solutions would be planting trees, getting more plants in your office. Single use, we all know it's an issue, but some people don't know how to change, aren't incentivized to change. And even though we know something is a problem, how do we address it? How do we integrate actually making an impact in an office or in a community or in a school or in policy? And really just empowering people to realize that they are just so powerful as a consumer and as a citizen, whether it be demanding something from a big company or being a part of clicking a button that makes a policy happen or makes a bill happen, or simply going in and saying you don't want a straw, or you're saying you don't want a plastic bag. These little things, these big things, come back to using our voice with respect and understanding not everyone agrees with climate solutions and being sustainable, but if we do it objectively, we do it with respect, and we consider who we're talking to and adjust our tone and adjust to that, I think it's really powerful. I'm just wanting to never underestimate how important consumer feedback, policy feedback, and just generally making your voice heard is. I think a lot of people get pushed down by it, and it's just, to be honest, it's just like racism. If I hear someone say something racist and I don't say something, I'm just as much as a part of the problem as someone who doesn't. Like, being static isn't an opportunity with what we're dealing with climate change. We need to be active, and making our voice heard is a huge part of that. And just cleaning up bloody rubbish. This was last time I was in Australia, my beach. I was raised in far north Queensland, off-grid in Cape Tribulation, my beautiful beach, no one's ever on it. I came home covered in rubbish. I'd never seen so much rubbish. And instead of just being mopey and walking past it, over the weekend I cleaned up 8 full big dustbins and picked up all kinds of junk, and I felt good about that. And obviously I'm sharing the story to you now, but like, there was no one around, there was no incentive, but I did it. It felt good, and now I walk along that beach and I can feel like I made an impact, and I will do that on that beach until my knees don't work and my hands stop working. And incentivizing people to think about using different materials, whether that be bamboo, which everything in there is made out of bamboo, or looking at ways we can synthesize CO2 into plastics and materials, making ocean plastics, pushing those into materials. Hemp, I know, is a huge commodity if we realize that it's not drugs, it's actually just a plant that can be used. Just That's a big part of integrating the solutions. Obviously, renewable tech from a microgrid standpoint, hugely important, encouraging people to either ring up their local utility company and demand green energy, which I know isn't a thing in Idaho, which is ridiculous, or just getting them to put solar panels on their roof, on their car, or potentially even just having a solar panel on the back of their phone. Whatever it is, implementing these solutions as quickly as we can. And diet. We all know diet is a huge part of climate change. The vegans in the house realize this more, but even if it's just a couple of less meat meals a week, or considering getting things more local, which our beautiful feast